Welcome to our fourth town hall meeting. I'm amazed that this many people got out of their gardens and their comfort of their home and the beautiful weather to be here. Thank you for being here. Okay, many thanks to the Planning Committee for these meetings. Please raise your hands. Mary Zellachild, Jim Merrill, Cindy Morninglight, Kimball Dodge, April Twiddell, and myself, Carolyn Diamond. We have the fifth town hall meeting on May 18th before our summer recess, so this is the last one in this cycle. We will resume in September and welcome people to participate in the planning for the next year. Our next meeting for planning is March 27th. If you're interested in being on the town hall meeting planning group, please contact me. Okay. Thank you, Dave Knudsen and the Grange, for the sound equipment and help. And Andy Wright for videography for Channel 3. There's a donation jar for expenses. We don't have a lot of expenses. We don't have a bank account. We just have a little kitty, and we pull out a little money to pay for printing or paper cups or something like that. So if you could offer something for that, it's very helpful. What is a town hall meeting, and how does it differ from city council or a Revite Ed meeting or a lecture or other research and information getting processes? The big difference is that this meeting needs you. It needs people to be here to get the full value from it. This is a place where the main purpose is to listen to the concerns of our neighbors and other community members, a place where our responsibility for the health and happiness of our shared community and for the common good is the point, a place where we can look each other in the eye and ask a further question if we don't understand a point of view, or follow up with a comment if we have knowledge of a situation being questioned. The drought, water shortages, and fire prevention has gotten our attention recently in a very dramatic way. There's an increased awareness that what our neighbors do directly affects us also, whether we are on city water or wells or springs. A fire spreads quickly from a neighbor's property to our own. Instead of looking at the drought as a temporary glitch along the road, it can be viewed as an opportunity, a chance to make some long-term plans that will serve our community into the future. Special thanks to our guest speakers, who all serve the community of Willits in many public and private ways, for taking time and effort to prepare for us today. So first we have over there on your right, sort of, Chief Daryl Shepner, Brook Trails Fire Department. Then we have Chief Carl McGann, Willits and Little Lake Fire Department, and is on the Fire Safe Council. Chris Baldo is a past firefighter for 25 years and is a registered forester and longtime landowner. Ellen Drell, founder and member of the Willits Environmental Center, is well-versed on forest and conservation issues, has been a landowner since 1977, and is interested in public land and conservation issues. Larry Desmond is one of our local water and well experts who has had extensive experience in all parts of the county. So we have other representatives of our city government. See Adrian Moore over there, our city manager. All righty, so let's get going.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity. Introduce myself, my background, my training experience as a firefighter for the Little Lake Fire Protection District in Willits. I became a volunteer firefighter in August of 1985, accepting a pay position January 1992. Became the district fire chief on April 2010. I'm a qualified fire instructor through the State Fire Marshal's Office, a certified fire officer, and I'm also a fire prevention officer through the State Fire Marshal's Office. In 2012, I was selected by the county fire chiefs to fill the position of operational area coordinator for fire and rescue Mendocino County, and I represent the 21 fire departments in our county that protect the infrastructure of Mendocino County, coordinating their response and training to the needs of the California Office of Emergency Services. I'm that coordinator, make sure that they meet a minimum level of training. The firefighters of the Little Lake Fire Protection District respond annually to emergencies and protect the lives and property within the 360 square miles that make up the district, including the state responsibility areas, SRA, local responsibility area, and the community of Willits. Our average calls are over 500 per year. Volunteers and staff of the Little Lake Fire Protection District take our responsibility seriously for the protection of people, property, and our valuable resources from the ravages of unwanted wildfires. Within our district, fires can start instantly from many causes, and because of the desires of individuals to build and live within the forest lands, rural settings, we don't have that option to allow these fires to burn. If we don't take the effort to extinguish or confine these fires, many residents could suffer a catastrophic loss. These brave men and women who volunteer as firefighters perform a vital service year-round, working long, arduous hours exposed to potentially dangerous conditions. We all depend on our firefighters to protect our families, our homes, and our forests as they volunteer their time, risking their lives and health to that effort. Many of our volunteer firefighters have served for decades developing the expertise needed to fight this unpredictable and resilient foe. We should all honor their service and provide these valiant professionals with the resources and support they need to do their jobs in the safest and most effective way possible. Rural fire departments such as ours represent the first line of year-round defense in coping with fires and other emergencies in our rural areas and communities. These departments provide many of the initial attacks on fires in Northern California and are responsible for the protection of lives, homes, and businesses. Their presence enhances rural development, economic vitality, thereby improving the standards of living in rural areas. Rural fire departments also provide major assistance to state and federal forestry agencies in the suppression of wildland areas in their areas of responsibility. 2014 has been setting state records. More records are likely to be set or broken as we advance through this year. We have observed fire watches, red flag warnings through the month of January. Statewide, CAL FIRE and other resources have already responded to numerous wildland fires in 2014, especially when compared to the number of wildland responses for the same time last year. There was a temporary burn ban put into effect in Mendocino County due to the extreme fire conditions we experienced between December 2013 and January 2014. California is currently facing a continued drought, even with the most recent welcome rains. The long-term forecast model shows decreasing rains through the month of March, general warming, drying of the interior with some potential for offshore flows. April is expected to be below average precipitation with above average temperatures. May through June should be near normal seasonal weather patterns. Due to the higher snowfall elevations, the total snowpack last recorded is 30% of the average statewide normal. When that's added to our expected total rainfall, we will once again experience an additional deficit in our groundwater and our surface waters. Because of the expected early drying conditions, significant fire activity may be experienced as early as May of 2014 in the northern half of the state. Winter model forecast for Northern California, along with the increased fire danger we are recognizing statewide, has initiated an early hiring of seasonal CAL FIRE firefighters to better respond to fires statewide. We will be losing our surface water early in the fire season because of the continuing drought conditions. Ponds, lakes, and streams will be drying out, which means we lose a substantial source of water for fire suppression. Air suppression by helicopter may not be available for some areas without a lengthy turnaround as they seek out suitable water resources. Even in those areas of hydrant systems, we will be facing problems due to the water providers limiting our access for water to fight fires. Our department will be more dependent on private and public water trucks to provide adequate water for fire suppression, but we may be faced with a delay as these tenders travel back and forth from wells and other available water resources. Due to the drought condition, our district will be experiencing tender dry vegetation weakened by the infestation of insects caused by drought and disease. Because of these conditions, our firefighters will be exposed to wildfires of hotter and greater intensity, creating dangerous conditions for firefighters and the public with the potential for devastation to private and public lands. Fighting wildland fires is like healthcare, where early detection and aggressive action can prevent the need for long-term, painful, expensive care. For our department, the common sense approach to fighting wildland fires is to contain the fire early by making the initial attack as quickly and aggressively as possible, using as many firefighters and resources available so as not to have to fight a massive long-term destructive campaign fire. We encourage our residents to ensure that their properties and driveways are clearly marked. Please make sure your gates and driveways are manageable for our fire apparatus, removing dense flammable vegetation within 10 feet of the driveway and from over the road to a height of 13 feet 6 inches. That's as per the county and state codes. All residents are encouraged to contact the county or city to replace missing road signs. Too often, road signs and addresses are removed by individuals, increasing the time it takes for emergency responders to arrive on scene. Key point on that, we're going to have people from outside the area supplying mutual aid to us. We know the area, they're not going to. All property owners and managers are encouraged to modify the fuels on and around their property. These modifications include the removal of fuel continuity by providing fuel breaks or buffers, such as fire-resistant vegetation. Remove the ladder fuels that allow ground fires to progress into the crowns of the trees. Provide that defensible space of 100 feet around buildings or residents that will help us protect these properties from fire. That defensible space also protects the wildland environment from structure fires. Homeowners must take personal responsibility to ensure that their homes and properties are safe from and against fire. Firefighters are not responsible for making private homes and property defensible, nor will they have time during an emergency. Property owners and managers are responsible, and the fire-wise steps they take before the fire season begins may be the difference in whether or not their home survives the next fire. Our firefighters have the option to bypass homes and properties that lack defensible space, have poor access and egress, are compromised by dense flammable vegetation, which can create a hazard to firefighters. During an active dynamic wildland fire, firefighters will be using these spaces created by property owners to steer the fire around and away from homes and structures, returning to mop up any existing hotspots once the fire front has passed. Without buffers and defensible spaces, firefighters may be put at greater risk trying to protect properties if they should decide or are forced defensively to make a stand. Ready, set, go. Residents should take the time to create a plan for their family. CAL FIRE has an excellent website, readyforwildfire.org, which has a wealth of information for property owners and families. Now is the time to start preparing your home and family, how they will evacuate prior to the next emergency. Review available and alternate routes, discuss where and how your family is going to meet, determine now what you're going to take with you. If your family is determined to stay, make sure your structure and property is as safe as you can make it. All of our residents are urged to be cautious this fire season. Our best tool this year is prevention and common sense, and not let any unwanted fires start. And there's timings.
It's always hard to follow sirens like that. I was a student back at Cal Berkeley in forestry school in early 70s. And one of my favorite professors was Harold Biswell. I don't know if any of you have heard of Harold Biswell, but he was a fire ecology professor and proponent of prescribed burning in the forests of California to reduce fire danger. And I remember in his classes he would show pictures of the Berkeley Hills fire from 1923. I don't know if you've ever seen those pictures, but in 1923, the fire started up in the top of the Berkeley Hills up by Tilden Park, and it just annihilated the north side of the UC Berkeley campus, all the way down to Shattuck. And you look at these pictures, and all you see are chimneys. I mean, it's pretty hard to believe that could happen to a city. And so in class, Harold said several times, he said, that if we don't do something about the fuel load in the Berkeley Hills, the Berkeley-Oakland Hills, a fire's going to start up there, and it's going to burn down until it hits the San Francisco Bay. That's the only thing that's going to stop it. And, Harold was this good old guy, and he was ridiculed for being a little worked up about this kind of thing. And then, of course, the 1991 fire, actually it started as kind of a fire chief's nightmare. It was a rekindle of a 5-acre grass fire on a Saturday, and Sunday morning the winds came up and they were blowing really, really hard, which is really hard to put fires out, but they were blowing 65, 70 miles an hour, and rekindled this grass fire. When at the height of the fire, they said the fire was burned a house every 11 seconds as it was burning down through Hiller Highlands. I grew up in that part of Berkeley, so I remember a lot of the areas that burn up. You'd think that an 8-lane freeway would be a pretty ideal fire break, and that wind blew that fire across that Highway 24 like it didn't exist. You have to realize that when you have the right conditions and you have the right fuels, that fire was completely out of control until the wind stopped. And it started at 11 in the morning, and the wind stopped about 6 at night, and most of the damage happened in that time. And then once the fire died down, a whole bunch of fire agencies jumped on it and were able to actually control it a couple days later. But it was one of those, until the conditions improved, it was uncontrollable by any department or any number of personnel. When you're in the fire service, Carl has lectured us about this a zillion times, but the flame length generally is about 3 times the fuel height. And so when the houses become the fuel, and so most of those Berkeley houses are at least 2 stories high, maybe this house is 30 feet high, you've got a 100-foot high wall of flame being blown by 70-mile-an-hour winds, and you can see that, the fire chief's not going to tell his crew to run out in front of that fire and put it out, because they can't, and they'll be hurt trying to. So I wanted to mention a little bit about where we live. We choose to live in Mendocino County for a variety of reasons, but one of them is this Mediterranean climate that we enjoy. And so we have this, normally have a relatively wet winter, and then we have this predictably dry summer that goes on for 5 or 6 months. And in that summer, the fuel moistures always diminish, and by late summer, the fire hazards always. When that balance starts changing and your winter isn't supplying the moisture that you hope it does, the fuel moistures in that 6-month summer period become critical almost at the beginning of summer. And then by late summer, I don't know what the hazard is past critical, but they're scary. Most of us like to live in what I call the oak woodland interface. There's not a whole lot of, unless you live in brick trails, you don't like to live in super dense forest, and you don't like to live out in the middle of the open plains. You like to live in this nice oak woodland environment. That is a ecosystem that is not self-maintaining. If you want to maintain that ecosystem like the Native Americans did, you burned it periodically, or you did something to reduce the fuel load, and you did something to reduce the competition from conifers, other species that grow up through the oak trees and tend to, because of their genetic capabilities, they'll overtop the oaks and kill the oaks, and then you have a whole bunch of shade-tolerant species taking over, and you get these real dense thickets that are very fire-prone. On my property up in Covelo, I've spent about every minute I'm up there. Basically, I kill Douglas fir trees because I cannot stand Douglas firs invading that oak grassland environment. Any landowners need to understand that ecosystem, or any ecosystem, is always growing, and it's growing. It can grow at a lot of different rates, but the fuel load keeps going up. So a really bad site might grow at 2 tons of fuel per acre per year, and if you're growing eucalyptus for biomass or something, it grows at like 13 tons per acre per year. And so as a landowner, a ton of wood, if you got to go out there and cut it down and pile it and burn it and chip it, or have your goats eat it, or do whatever it is, managing the fuel on anyone's piece of property is a lot of work. I mean, your choices are controlling that fuel and knowing that it's growing every year. You can't just do it and say, okay, I prescribe burn my property, or I piled and burned my property, or I thinned the property. It's something that has to happen on a continual basis because it's growing. Every year, your property's growing. So I guess that's, seems like a really simple thing, but I just want to leave you with that fact that the woods are growing and they're becoming an increasingly fire-prone situation unless we're willing to deal with it. And I know that Harold Biswell's he wrote a book, Prescribed Burning, that I recommend everyone read. But I remember he left this quote in there at the end of the book. He said, "Uncontrollable wildfires should not be blamed on dry weather or lack of personnel and equipment to fight them, but on the management that allows the fuels to build up beyond all reasonable levels."
I'm a self-taught environmentalist. I would say that my mind and my heart and my spirit have always been energized and exercised by the wonder of the natural world. But I didn't quite realize that protecting it was what I wanted to do until I had finished with my formal education. So I have spent the last 35 years educating myself informally about forestry and fisheries and lots of different ecosystems. So my education in these areas is somewhat piecemeal, but I've had the privilege of working with some really fine foresters and biologists, and so I feel privileged to have been able to expose myself to some fine thinkers in this field. My first impulse when I think about the forest or trees or fire or water is to be engaged by the beauty of it, and for me, what is really the wonder and the mystery of it. So when I look at a magnificent, big, dead oak tree in the forest, I don't necessarily see waste. I've come to learn that really in the natural world, there is no such thing as waste. There is sometimes excess and abundance and sometimes scarcity, but in the long term, there's no waste. So I recall hearing someone say to me as we were driving by a forested hillside, and there was one big old snag standing out there. What a waste. That should have been harvested before it died. But I don't share that view. I look at it and I've come to realize that it provides the home, it can provide the homes for all kinds of cavity nesters and woodpeckers, cavity nesters from little chickadees to owls, and then of course habitat for raptors who nest in the top of big snags and are able to build their great big nests and look out over the forest and go after rodents that would otherwise overtake the forest and eat up all the seeds and all the acorns if the raptors and the owls weren't in place to prey on them. And likewise, when I walk through the forest and I see a massive old log lying on the forest floor, I don't see waste there either. I see basically, among other things, a reservoir of water. And during the course of our Mediterranean seasons, that big log that absorbs water all winter is also a source of moisture all summer. And it's not only habitat for mammals, it can crawl inside if it's hollowed out for shelter and protection, but it's also habitat for all the little creatures that live in the forest that need moisture even when it's 100 degrees outside and hasn't rained in 3 months. The skinks, the newts, the salamanders, they all depend on that moisture that's held in the slowly decomposing log. And it's also home for literally tens of thousands of insects, many of which we haven't even identified yet. And of course, fungus, all of which contribute to breaking down this log, which in turn converts the stored solar energy of hundreds of years into energy that can be used to grow for the new forest that is alive and growing and putting on ring growth every year. And when I look at a river that's in flood, I don't see wasted water just going to the ocean. A flooded river is necessary. The power and the force of the flood is necessary not only to carry logs down to the mouth of the river and out into the ocean to be spread along by waves onto the beaches, and those logs provide diversity and habitat and ecosystem support for the beaches. The floodwaters provide nutrients for the estuaries, and just the sheer power of the water itself scours out the sand and the gravel in certain places and carries it downstream and dumps it someplace else, and it creates a mosaic of pools and riffles that then are used by the aquatic creatures that find little niches in this diverse environment, but also provides the critical habitat for the anadromous fish that come upstream to spawn in the riffles and to hide out in the deep pools for the fish that don't just return to the ocean or don't die on the banks after spawning. In particular, the summer steelhead of the Middle Fork of the Eel River depend utterly on those deep pools in the Middle Fork because they come up in the late spring and early summer and don't spawn, but hang out and just wait all summer long in those pools. And if they're not deep enough and not hidden enough by overhangs that have been scoured out by the floodwaters, they won't make it through the summer. And then I look at something like the city's Elias Well, this incredible magic well out there that the city happens to own that bubbles up onto the surface of the ground at, Larry thought, 30 gallons a minute, and without pumping. And it was doing that in February before this rain, after almost a year of no precipitation, and yet that Elias well was bubbling up to the surface. And when I think of that, my mind goes to questions like, how is that so? How does that work? Where's that water coming from? What feeds it? Is it dependent on annual rainfall? Is it coming from some ancient source of water that's not being replenished? Does it depend on decades of rainfall, or where is it fed? How does the water come in? What are the strata that it's coming from? And what is the hydrostatic pressure down there? And how does that affect the surrounding groundwater? And how does that affect surrounding wells? And what life is that water supporting, even in the vicinity of the well? Are there certain aquatic creatures that live there and are able to survive all summer out there in the valley? Maybe something unique to Little Lake Valley. There are probably freshwater clams that survive there and very few other places in the valley because, as you know, this is a seasonal wetland that in most places dries out substantially in the summer but then hydrates again in the winter. And what animals depend on that year-round spring that bubbles up to the surface? They don't have to climb up or down anywhere to find it. It's just right there on the surface. How many animals does that service? The last question that comes to mind is, how much water can I take from that well without harming it? Unfortunately, we live in a world where that's usually the first question that is asked. How much can I take without harming it? How much timber can I take without harming the forest? How much water can I divert without harming the stream? How much can I pump from this well without harming it? And those are good questions. And they're in some ways progressive questions because the tagline is without harming it. But the first part of it is how much can I take? And I, in my work as an environmentalist, have attempted to bring to people the notion of first ask all those other questions, and then say, if we need to, how much can I take? And I think we still have, we have made decisions that involve human use of natural resource areas, and in some ways we're locked now into creating defensible space and these many things that we're talking about here, and the city needs a backup supply of water, and so it's looking to expand its supplies of water and have some more security. So we're locked into some of these things now, but every day we face choices that we're not locked into yet, and so I'm here to appeal to ourselves as individuals, but more importantly to ourselves as a community, to ask all those other questions first before we ask, how much can I take? And just as a little teaser for perhaps another discussion, if not today, I've been doing a little reading on the geology of Little Lake Valley, and I'm telling you, it is fascinating. So I have a little bit of information to impart, but I'll save that to later if people are interested in that. But and that would be part of beginning to answer some of those questions about the Elias Well and really understand that incredible natural feature that we are lucky enough to be living with.
Larry Desmond, Mendocino Waterworks. I'm a water resource specialist, kind of self-made. I mean, I'm well-educated, but my actual academics is in horticulture. So people go, what do you do in water? Well, anyone who's involved with horticulture realizes the next step is the water. So wherever I've lived, it's mostly in Northern California, but the water on different ranches and property has always been a bit of a conundrum for me, including moving to Willits. I don't have the water I'd like to have. So as a purveyor of water, it's more than humbling. I have stronger words than that, but I've come out of it. I'll explain in a minute what I do. It works well for me. But anyway, I'm a consultant. I do water use planning. Whether I'm working for this park system or vineyards or marijuana growers, I work for everybody because we're all, one way or another, diverting water. So to tag on what Ellen was saying, how do you do it in such a way that you get what you need, it's safe, but only not for you, but also for the environment. In other words, you're not destroying what's left. We've gotten into some pretty wasteful practices. I'm not a minimalist, but I'm a realist. Let's find out what you need. And most people right there are stuck. They don't know really how much they're even using. So when you come up with numbers, people are always kind of puzzled. So I'm a big promoter of water meters. If you have one, use it. They're great. I also locate a lot of wells. I've got a lot of background in hydrology, but I'm actually a dowser also. So when I'm on property, I'm looking at everything. There's features on property. Let's say a ridgetop, for example, and you'll be going along, and all of a sudden you drive or walk into like a madrone oak woodland, and these are indicative to sandstone soils. There's certain features. It's kind of like a mosaic of information. But I get a lot of information just by being on the property, and I usually walk as opposed to drive. And then when I like a particular area, I'll bring my sticks out and do dowsing, and I've been doing it for about 30 years. Real comfortable with it, and works great, and I'm totally fascinated by water. It's got my attention. I do spring water development. I do water purification. And on water purification, I'm drinking out of a bottle here. We spent over $18 billion last year on these silly containers. And it's also, this is from California, but generally we tend to find water as far away on the globe as we possibly can and bring that to ourselves, assuming that it's good. Well, it's a totally unregulated industry. There's 1.5 people in the United States that actually handle the regulatory of the bottle industry. To me, it's a disaster. But why do we do it? And it's convenient, number one. And also, we don't have the information, so I'm a big proponent of getting your water tested. Issues about like arsenic, for example, has come up. Most people don't test for arsenic. People go, I don't have arsenic. Well, did you test it? No. But I mean, it's like, get the information so that we can intelligently sit down and deal with your water so you don't have to do this. I like information. And also on information, California has finally come on board to do actual groundwater monitoring, so we can be the last state in the union to actually do this. I mean, it just is mind-boggling to me. We can put in a lot of wells, or what you might call straws in the ground, draw the water up, not really fully understanding how much we're using, or better at how much we actually need, but we don't understand the what's really down there. What are we pulling out? So knowledge, it's like filling in the other side of the equation. We talk about the drought. I just want to give us a little more picture here, what's going on, aside from what may be coming in preparedness, but also this last year we had, let's see if I can look at these numbers and talk at the same time. Yeah, last year, this is interesting, last rainfall season. Before January 1st, we had this is my place, we had 35 inches of rain. After the 1st of January, we only had 10. A dry spring, really dry. Then this year, we started off with a very dry fall. I had 8 inches before January 1st of this year. So that's a dry spring backed up with a summer, of course, and then a very dry fall. Gratefully, as we can all say, is after the 1st of January, we've had 21 inches. Now, the numbers are not as good overall as last year, but it's these late rains that really give us the main benefit. Not just the green hills, but it's not so much how much water you get, it's when it comes. And these late rains are better for our use. I also want to acknowledge the city of Willits proclaiming this water emergency. As you may recall, they were going to go from phase 2 to phase 3. It's kind of incremental steps in January. And we already knew it was going on. Am I recalling that right? Is it January, February? I think it was January. But anyway, thank you. Doing that, it brought a lot of attention to us. In fact, my sister down in Orange County, she calls, she goes, wow, how's your drought? I go, oh, it's fine, how's yours? I mean, it's like, she had 1.2 inches of rain. And it's like, well, it's just a disconnect. So it brings our attention to this topic. So that is one big deal. I think that's really good. I brought the state in for funding. That's been fantastic. And, you know, basically water awareness. But it's also making some changes, which I think are overdue. Willits has had its surface water treatment facilities. There's nothing else there. It's like when the water's gone, it's gone. So I'm really happy, as Ellen was mentioning, Eliza Well, which is magical to me too. In fact, the city pumped, I believe the city pumped that last year at about 400 gallons a minute for 3 months. It's just a real strong source of water. Now, that kind of alarms people, but if you're going to use, like a municipal district is going to use a water source, they really have to find out what does this really do, as opposed to building this infrastructure and then find out later, well, it was more like a bubble on the screen. It's, you know, it's diminished. That's a very powerful well. So that the changes, and also changes in the city. We're promoting now, the city is small agricultural wells for ag use only within the city limits. That's fantastic. And Brook Trails is now on board for rainwater catchment. So it's not just the state, we're making some changes, and everybody in the world seems to know about Willits. And we are not the only ones. I mean, everyone's having problems for the most part. So in here, you're going water sources. And if it rained all the time, that would be our source. But the reality is you're either on city water, you've got a well, you've got a spring, or surface water. And if someone else has some other option I'm not aware of, let me know. But that's pretty much it. And you can store water either in the ground, in an aquifer, or on the surface. And there's no other choices either. That's about it. So it's getting down, it's sitting down with people and having a frank but informed discussion, so we're both on the same page to figure, okay, so what are you going to do? Because we all, our water usage and planned or lack of planned is unique to our own situation. By the way, behind Mr. Peter Smith there's a model. That's a great model for, and I can't put it on my lap, it's too big. But if that would be more indicative to like our Willits aquifer, maybe it's 600 feet deep of alluvial soils. That shows you confined as well as unconfined aquifers. There's a lot of information in that model. It's not operating, but if you spend a few minutes, you're going to get a lot of information, and I'll be glad to talk to anybody about it. For the aquifer for the Willits Valley, for example, that's mostly sand and silt, some gravels. As it gets into these smaller particles like silt and clay, it gets tighter and tighter. So it's not like, it's a big bowl, you might say. It's full of material, and your ability to extract that water depends on the porosity of that soil. Some is better than others, and you'll see that in that model too. You know, the Sacramento Valley, that's maybe 6,000 feet deep. and it's coarser sand, so it's kind of unbelievable amounts of water over there. So what I do on my property, as I'm a water banker, what I do is I store excess spring water. I have spring water. My springs run year-round, but they get really diminished in the summer. I mean, it's running, but it's like, you're holding the glass up there. It's, it's 12 ounces a minute. That doesn't work. It's great quality water. People use it from microbrews. They go, this is fantastic water. Where'd you get this fantastic source? I go, it's dribbling over here. So what I do is I put in two 30,000-gallon tanks at 15 cents a gallon, so you can figure that one out, 50 cents a gallon. But what it did, and I was putting in wells, and I was getting boron, I had arsenic, artesian, by the way. I was not having good luck on water. And I'm very successful finding water for other people. For myself, it's been an expensive proposition, and but it's been a real strong learning curve too. So these tanks have saved me and Marcella. So because we're big garden people and we use quite a bit of water, and I can take that spring water, and again, it's excess. I'm taking about maybe 2 gallons a minute from a spring that runs maybe 8 gallons a minute. So the majority is going, but it gives me 3,000 gallons a day, so I can fill those tanks up pretty quickly. That's one idea. I'm available. I work all over the counties. But contact me if you have questions. I'll talk to people. I go out to your property. And that's it. Good luck on the drought.
My name is Darrell Shepner. I'm the fire chief up in Brook Trails. And what he said. Obviously, Brook Trails is in a little bit different situation in the sense that we have the highest fire severity zone as declared by the Board of Forestry and by CAL FIRE. And we have a very extensive hazard abatement program. One of the things that Chief McGann talked about was providing that defensible space. It's extremely crucial, and I think rather than talk about some of the things that Carl talked about, I would like to talk more about how to protect your homes and what you can do as individuals to keep those fires small. First, a little background with me. I've been with Brook Trails. This is my 18th year with them. I'm 38 years in the fire service. I worked in Southern California. I went to school in Washington State, did my paramedic school up there, also worked for the fire department up there as well. Went to Arizona as a fire chief, and then I'm back in California, which I'm a native of as well. I also have an arson canine dog that a lot of you probably know, good old Ashes, and that's a service that we provide throughout the county and as well to other counties investigating fires. With that being said, let me talk a little bit about in Brook Trails what some of these requirements are. California Law 4291 talks about defensible space, and this is what CAL FIRE goes out and will cite residents if they're in non-compliance of this. This is nothing new in Brook Trails because we've been doing this for 25 years now with ensuring that property owners maintain their property to a fire-safe level, as well as the absentee owners. So, it doesn't do a whole lot of good if I take my home and provide a good defensible space around it, comply with all of this, and then the lot next door to me has never been maintained, has a very high understory, a lot of dead vegetation, ladder fuels, all these other things that create problems that are going to burn my home. So we've taken both approaches, dealing with that absentee owner as well as the property owner. Some of the requirements that we have are that you need to limb your trees up, to limb them up at least 10 feet, as well as to limb away from the structure by about 10 feet. That doesn't mean you have to remove the tree. We don't want you to remove the tree. In fact, we have an ordinance that requires that you not remove anything greater than 6 inches unless it's under the hazard abatement program or it is cleared by the district. And that keeps people from coming in and obviously clear cutting lots and going, well, I don't have to worry about this hazard anymore, I'll just cut them all down. So we're pretty stringent on watching that and making sure that we try to maintain that. Clearing around the structure itself, making sure that wood decks, that you don't have material stored up underneath those wood decks. There are obvious places where fire will find its way to and now involve the structure. Clearing dead vegetation away from the structure. As Chief McGann alluded to, CAL FIRE has quite a bit of good information on their website. You can also go to brooktrailsfire.com, and we have it on our website along with our standards and our requirements. Clearing around propane tanks, ensuring that propane tanks are clear. There are no flammable materials within 10 feet of that propane tank, as well as making sure that branches aren't hanging over the top of the structure. These are all areas that tend to take that fire, bring it to the ladder fuels, bring it to the tops of the trees, and then now carries into the structure. One of the things with the obvious drought that we're in Brook Trails, we're on a tank system with 2 reservoirs that currently we're pretty fortunate, they're full. But how long that will last, you know, who knows? And talking with Chief McGann earlier, the weather forecast is not real promising. Obviously, the CAL FIRE fuel models and things of that nature are not promising as well. So we don't know what's going to happen between now and the height of fire season, if you will. So, you know, we might look good now, but it could get real ugly later. So we too also have a water conservation plan in effect. We are taking our own steps to ensure that. One of the biggest issues that I see too with residents is that they feel that if there's a fire at their house that, you know, I've put these sprinklers, lawn sprinklers on my roof, and I'm gonna turn the water on and I'm gonna take off and get out of here and my house is gonna be protected. It's not. And unfortunately, what happens is you waste the water. You draw down that resource we need to fight those structure fires. You know, we in the fire service look at wildland-urban interface fires as winners and losers. So any firefighter that shows up here from anywhere in the state of California has that same training. We look at them and determine whether or not it's something defendable or it's not. If it's not, we lay a kiss on it and we move on because we don't have a choice. We could spend all of our resources attacking something that is non-savable, and now that fire is spread even farther where we have an opportunity to move up and make a stand someplace else or direct that fire's path. In Brook Trails, we have an evacuation plan that is in place. It's a plan I wrote several years ago. There are several other routes out of Brook Trails. Although people feel that there's only one way in and one way out, a paved one way in and paved one way out is correct. There are some evacuation routes, one that leads from Primrose Avenue over to Highway 20. That's a pretty good an area over there. We drive them every single year prior to fire season to ensure that they're open and make sure that we have a route through there. They have done some logging back in there. All these evacuation routes go across private property. So we have to recognize and respect the rights of those property owners and not have people driving down and practicing and so forth and, well, I just want to see where it goes. No, you know, that's not what we really would encourage people to do. But that's a pretty decent route, but with some of the logging that's gone on, I noticed there were some pretty good water bars in there. So what that now becomes is an area where we'll bring fire apparatus up rather than send vehicles down through there. You know, somebody in their lowered Cadillac is not gonna make it very far. So those areas have been identified as routes where, again, fire apparatus can easily manage, but vehicles can't. One of the other more commonly known route is the one by the airport that goes across Mr. Padula's property back to Highway 101 and the back of the old mill. Now, Mr. Padula has been outstanding working with us over the years. He's put in some culverts and has always helped in maintaining that route to ensure that it stays open for us. And again, it's another route that we drive. This route, if we had to send vehicles, we would. One of the other big misnomers I think that a lot of people have is that if there's a declared evacuation, no matter where it's at, but more particularly in brook trails, it's not going to be everybody leave now. It's going to be something that is going to be well planned. It's going to be something that, you know, CAL FIRE is responsible for the wildlands. We as local government fire departments, Carl, myself, the 21 other departments in this county, are responsible for those structures and your lives and your property and those types of things. You know, we have this constant battle with CAL FIRE of, you know, keep your wildland fire out of my structure, and okay, I'll keep my structure out of your wildland, you know. So obviously we have this great working relationship with them. They bring to the table a lot of resources, and you know, we definitely use them as much as we possibly can. Even though they are a seasonal department, they are only here. They'll add these firefighters and they'll work through the season. But then when it starts to rain, then they reduce their staffing and rely again on local government departments to deal with all of the multiple incidents that occur. So those evacuation routes are in place. They are, like I say, maintained. Typically what would happen is a particular area would be evacuated one at a time. Probably would be 2 lanes of traffic coming down Sherwood Road to keep the vehicles onto the hard surface, not get them off the road. A lot more controllable for us and law enforcement. What we ask the folks up there to do is to, and this applies anywhere, is to follow the direction of law enforcement and fire officials when it comes to evacuation. Be prepared. Don't wait till the last minute. You know, we're in a situation that we have such a heightened of awareness of the fire and brook trails and that potential hazard and the catastrophic damage that it could cause, that we have a fire on one side of our district and people on the complete opposite side of the district are blowing up our telephones. Do I need to evacuate? No, you're okay. In fact, we'd like you to just stay right where you're at, and the fire is either under control or, you know, listen to local law enforcement and fire officials. Also, we have the new 911 reverse 911 system that works extremely well. We've used it in brook trails a couple of times with law enforcement issues, and you know, that would be another way to let people know. If you have a cell phone, you can go onto the Sheriff's Department's website and log on to them and put your cell phone in there, and you'll get those same reverse 911 calls. The drought is obviously something that concerns all of us in the fire service. I'm the past president of the County Fire Chiefs Association. I've worked diligently throughout the years, like Carl, with all of the other local departments to try to help them and for them to understand some of the safety and the things that are the most important things to us is the firefighter safety, is being careful and protecting them as well as the public. Okay?
Thank you all so much. First, Bill.
Thank you. I wanted to ask the fire chiefs, there was one route that you didn't mention to evacuate brook trails, and I was wondering if you do not consider it a viable route to get out of brook trails, and that's north on Sherwood Road to get back to Highway 101. If you stay to the right, as you go north? Do you consider that a viable route? And also, are there safe places in brook trails that one might possibly go to? One place that I've heard of is that flatland on Madrone Drive, although it's a grassland and highly flammable, of course.
In our evacuation plans, there are assembly areas, and if you need a copy of that, you can go onto the website, the district's website, the fire department's website. You can get a hard copy from the district office, the firehouse, wherever you need one. And in that, it does designate areas that are considered assembly points. The airport is obviously another assembly point. Obviously, that grassland is not one of our assembly points. And there are probably 3 to 4 other routes out of brook trails as well. And we do consider going north on Sherwood Road to the Fort Bragg, Laytonville turnoff, staying to the right and following that back around. Again, we have to remember that fire is extremely dynamic, and it depends on where this fire is and why it's so important for you to follow the directions of the firefighters and law enforcement, because that may not be the way we want you to go. You may be going into harm's way right there. So again, all of that information is available and you can pick that up.
So my question is about our Little Lake Valley aquifer, and there are 2 aspects to that. One is, do we know if the aquifer is contiguous? And if it is, if a well is dropped down into that aquifer, how does that impact a well that might be nearby in terms of the drawdown? So that's one part of the question. The second part is, does the aquifer extend beyond the city limits?
The Little Lake Valley aquifer is not contiguous. It's very complex, and the geologic history is the reason for it. But there are lenses of sand and gravel and lenses of clay, and they all sort of interfinger with each other at different levels. So it's very complicated, and only a little portion of it is known, and there have been attempts to map the subsurface stratigraphy. But it's very complex because it's a series of meandering rivers that sometimes have a lot of power and sometimes have a little bit of power. So they deposit different kinds of deposits in different areas at different times, and then they all overlap. So it's complex. I would venture to say that the city of Willits sits on top of that. It's just a continuation of that complexity that goes from the hills in the east to the hills on the west, and from the uplands in the south to the lake in the north.
What I would add to that is that I find in my work too, you can have a well, let's say in the corner of that room that has an issue, let's say with boron, and you put another well on that corner of the room and you don't have boron. So as far as being contiguous, no, it's extremely mixed out there. And I'm totally mystified as well. I mean, the more you study it, you realize how complicated it is. And that, again, that model shows a lot of that right there. As far as the city limits, no. We're kind of on the western edge. It extends below us and also west of us. There's certain areas out in the valley you're going to have that confined aquifer, which gives you that potential for an artesian well. More commonly, our wells, let's say down to 100 feet, tend to be pretty decent quality water. As you proceed further down, you get into another aquifer that has more questionable water. The issue about the boron, too, is it's in pockets. So either you have it or not. You don't know whether you have it unless you test.
Not too long ago, we saw in the news about how in Washington they had, extreme flooding. And I was wondering what the feasibility would be of looking to places, probably closer than Washington, but possibly creating aqueducts, to bring water where you could work together, because they would be motivated to get the water away from them, and we're motivated to bring the water here. Possibly working things out with other places to, bring in water.
It's an interesting question, and we've obviously been doing that in California and other places as well. It's logistically, I mean, it's just so darn far away. And often what's happening with for example, on a personal level too, we tend to spend a lot of time this time of year getting rid of water, let's say surface water, and then in a few weeks we're scampering around looking for water. I mean, we're kind of fanatic. As a society, I think we are too. But bringing water, hundreds or thousands of miles away, it just isn't practical. And elevations, I mean, some of the amazing things they do out in the Central Valley has done a lot of damage, and it's also brought us a lot of benefit. It's trying to balance that. So we're going to get better at it. But we use way more water, let's say, as compared to any European country. Our way of water is essential, but we don't have an analogy, we're kind of like little kids. We don't understand the benefit. We understand the benefit, and all we would do is we want more and more of it. And we complain when it costs money. To me, when it comes out of your tap under pressure and purified, it's a miracle. I mean, look no further.
I was just going to mention one of my pet ideas is that I think water, in my mind, is way undervalued in California. And I know, I mean, you can correct me with the city, but I'm sure that if a dope grower wants to back his truck up to a hydrant and get 4,000 gallons of water, I think the going rate is $0.01 a gallon for water. And I think that's pretty standard. I know that's what it cost in Covelo. If you go back up to the firehouse and get a truckload of water, it's $0.01 a gallon. And I think that's what the city sells it for, and I may be wrong, but and to me, the little bottle like that probably cost you $1, or I don't know what it cost. So, I think until water gets up to some real value, you can't. I mean, if water had a real value, you could bring it from Washington down here. But if people only think it's worth $0.01 a gallon, you have a hard time doing anything for $0.01 a gallon. If it doesn't just come out of the ground right in front of you, you can't sell it for $0.01 a gallon.
So I have a couple of questions. So one is that $150 a year that we started paying. Is that going for anything new, or is that just to keep CAL FIRE afloat? And my second question is, so I live at the Golden Rule Mobile Village. So that's a cluster of dwellings in the middle of a big open space. And when I drive down the road, there's a lot of space between the trees, thanks to the cows. So I think that's probably good. But as far as these dwellings that are like not as close together, well, it's about like a town closeness. So besides making sure there's nothing under the deck and stuff piled up against the house and stuff like that, what other advice is there for people that live in clustered dwelling situations, and what is a good place to look for a list of do's and don'ts?
Firewise, Firewise, and their ideas for property owners, that things they can do for awareness, things they can do to harden their structure against fire, try to prevent that continuation of fire from structure to structure. On the SRA fee, if you're in one of the fire protection districts, you get a $35 discount, so it's $115 a year. But CAL FIRE this year, they are providing hand crews. They're assisting with the fire safe councils, the organized fire safe organizations, and they're going to be doing fuel modification and fuel reduction. And one of the first ones was going to be in Pine Mountain, especially since their fire safe council lost their grant funding this year. They don't have the chipping program. In the SRA, they should be seeing some benefit with the $135 or the $150 the fee.
Don't get me started on CAL FIRE. Being a local government fire chief, and when this their fee, I do. Yeah. When this first came out, I was president of the county fire chiefs, and it became an issue at every single meeting, not just here, but throughout the state of California. Don't get me wrong, I have nothing but the utmost respect for CAL FIRE. and what they do and how they provide the service, and we rely on them. But the truth of the matter is that that fee does not put any boots on the ground. It does not put more firefighters in their firehouse. It does not improve things for you as a property owner. I'm sorry, and I probably upset some of my friends at CAL FIRE, but they know how we feel, and this is the same feeling that's felt throughout the county fire chiefs. In my particular case, and in Carl's, and is in 21 other departments in this county, we are tax-based driven. And in my case, and in Carl's, recently, Carl went for a firehouse and it failed. I've gone out for a fire tax before and it's failed. We are in a situation that we're back out again, having to ask the voters to approve a fire tax that will support our fire department. It's going to go up $34 a year. And I get the constant question from everybody, can I take that $150 I give to CAL FIRE and give it to you? Yeah, I'd love it if you did. And where were you 3 years ago when I tried this? But, you know, the problem is that the local government departments take a very hard hit. In my case, it's not going to salaries, wages, buildings, anything like that. It's putting protective clothing on the backs of my volunteer firefighters. It's buying a water tender, you know, things that we desperately, desperately need. And quite frankly, if this tax doesn't pass, I'm not sure what's going to happen. You know, our hazard abatement program, I have a deputy chief, myself and my deputy chief is paid as well. And he deals with all of the fire prevention and dealing with the 6,000 lots we have up there and all of the property owners. We'll write this summer over 1,100 grass lot notices. CAL FIRE doesn't write any grass lot notices. We do. And like I said, it's something we've done for 25 years. So it's kind of a bitter thing for me because I hated seeing Carl lose his tax. I hated seeing other local government departments throughout the state of California have to fight this and not be able to fund.
Yeah, I was really fascinated when Ellen talked about this unique and wonderful resource of the city-owned well that we have. I didn't realize it was so productive. And my question is to whoever can answer, you talked about how do we know really what's going on? Why is it doing what it's doing? How is it affecting you know, other wells in the area or other parts of the aquifer? And I wonder, how would we go about finding that out? That seems like that would be a really important thing to know and something really worth putting some time, energy, and money into finding out how all this works. Can you or anybody else explain how we would go about doing that?
One of the reasons that the city didn't do any further investigations other than to determine that it could pump a lot over a long period of time was because they were going for this water in a declared emergency, and that allowed them to avoid the requirements of the California Environmental Quality Act. Had it not been an emergency and the city was seeking to expand its water supply, it would have been considered a project under that law. And as much as people, you know, like to complain about that law and go and follow it kicking and screaming, one of the wonderful things about it is that it forces us to ask those questions that I laid out before you do anything. It would be good if the city, I mean, you know, if the state of emergency is lifted, or even if it isn't lifted, it would be of a benefit, I think, to all of us to go through that process of looking at the environmental impacts of pumping that water. And you can begin to answer some of those questions. Now, actually determining definitively all the questions about the source and the effects as you go further and further and further from the well is a long-term research process. And so that would take a while, but at least we could begin the process.
Adrian Moore, correct me if I'm wrong on this. My understanding on that pumping, which lasted 3 months, is that you know, well, when you pump water out of well, it has an effect on the immediate area, and it gradually moves out into the surrounding area. when they were pumping that at 400 gallons a minute, what's the terminology is the cone of depression. The water level goes down in that well a little bit, and then it broadens out, but no deeper. It gets shallower its effect as you go further out. But the cone of depression was only 18 inches. That's an amazingly productive aquifer. It's under pressure trying to get out of the ground. And again, it's not to overuse it, no, but it's to get information on it. And then if it is utilized on a regular basis or as needed, they can throttle back that pump so they can monitor the water usage so we're not affecting other people. I think first of all, the groundwater is underutilized. And again, I'm not trying to dry everything up, but I think it's a resource that we haven't utilized. And I'm for utilization of it with information. In other words, what effects are we having? So you go through it in a cautionary way, precautionary. But to say we don't want to do it because it may have arsenic, get it tested. Or you do the test, you find out about what its capabilities are.
Probably the reason that you don't see a lot more prescribed burning on other than large ownerships, because anytime you put fire on the ground, you have risk of spreading to neighboring lands. I think a more reasonable alternative, because of what I call fragmented ownership, where you've got ownership that doesn't follow, either their properties are too small or they don't follow natural features. So if fire isn't going to follow a property line, it's going to follow the topography. So it's going to maybe burn to the ridge and go out when it hits the road on the ridge. But but too many property owners don't have the luxury of owning to the ridgetop. But you do have some alternatives for controlling the fuel on your property to mimic prescribed burns. I know that, I don't prescribe burn on my property because I'm always worried about it taking off across the Forest Service on my place. So I try to do what I think a prescribed burn would do and but do it manually. I go out there with a chainsaw and I probably burn 50 huge piles a year. I build piles and build piles and build piles during the summer. And I also have a chipper, and I sometimes, the problem with burning is that you never get a burn day on the day that you're available to burn. In my case, I got to be at work at Monday, so I get a burn day on Sunday, and you can't, the fire doesn't automatically go out on Sunday night when I leave. So there's a lot of issues there. If you can't prescribe burn, I think you have to do it manually. And I know you know more. There are some assistance programs for getting people out or getting funding to help you do that. And I think Larry knows more about that than I do, and he can maybe fill you in about getting some help. But it's, like I said, these forests are growing every year. So not only you have to do it, you have to do it next year, and then you got to do it next year. It's not. You don't have the luxury of doing it once.
If I can add on to that, yeah, what Chris is referring to is it's something you're going to constantly be doing, and it's overwhelming, particularly if you put it off for 15 years. But there you can get, most of us have. Most people, especially I'm not picking on brook trails, but it's a classic example of I need help in the woods. It needs to be thinned. But the NRCS, or Natural Resource Conservation Service, it's across the street from Freeman Brothers, between Les Schwab and the tractor place there, now go west. Go in there, call them up on the phone, but they'll come out at no fee to your property and look at what's going on and come up with a management plan. They take your input too. So they're not trying to clear it all up, but what would you like to see done here? Very useful.
I just want to put in a plug for prescribed burning. I concur with Chris and others who've tried it. it's very hard and scary and almost impossible for individual landowners to do it themselves. So I think, Chris, what you were maybe suggesting, or what came to my mind when you were talking, is that perhaps it's something that a neighborhood or an area, a little mini watershed could get together and perhaps do it together. But I just want to put in a plug here for it, because fire is such a necessary part of forest health, which you may know, but it has all sorts of benefits for the forest if it goes through on a periodic basis. It adds minerals to the forest floor, which the forest needs. Of course, fire and rain are the two things that keep our forests so healthy, and of course we're short on both now, but fire is an important element. So if we as a society and a community can figure out how to make this a little less daunting, because it really is for individual property owners, I think it's a wonderful tool for maintaining forest health. And just let me add here that some of the terrible fire ladder and low brush and all those things that we're scared of and we want to move are also critical elements of a healthy, diverse forest. So it's just an indication of the pact that we've made with the devil by moving out into the forest. So before we continue to do that, it's good to back up and start understanding what all those processes are about before we find ourselves in this situation that's so difficult to manage.
Prescribed burns. Brook Trails did one a number of years ago where they used the helicopter, and we had set up firefighting crews that were all ready to do it, and then they eject this ping pong ball out of the helicopter, and when it hits the ground it starts a fire, and that's how they do their controlled burns. The problem was that it went over the line of the prescribed area and continued to burn. Fortunately, you know, we had crews there, they were able to maintain it. The big problem is that you constantly hear that prescribed burns have gotten away and destroyed homes and people have lost their lives. I'm in 100% agreement that prescribed burning is the best thing for the fuels management, but again, it's in the right situation.
Okay, I've got a question about people not on city water. If wells, springs, whatever's dry up during the summer, what alternatives do we have? Call the tanker truck and get water trucked in, or if there's any other plans? Or
It's very individual, obviously, but I would hope you wouldn't be doing the water tank. It's anticipating that problem. Or like on your property, you've got that pond. Mike has a situation developed there where he can use the surface water treatment, small plant, to purify the water for him. That's a big step ahead of most of us. Most people see a pond water because you're going to use most of your water. Where do you use it? It's agricultural. You know, whether you garden, whatever you're doing with that water. Domestically, you know, 2 people in a house, you know, maybe you're using 50 to 100 gallons a day. But outside the garden, depending on how large that garden is, that may be several hundred gallons a day. You could curtail that use, but it's mainly coming up with that plan. So that question you're asking right now, as opposed to now it's August and I'm out of water, because we all failed to ask that question now. So it's planning for it. You don't have to go to the extent I did and put a big tanks in like that, but you want to put a system into your buffering it. In other words, I have some reserve, whether you have a hydrant on it, which I'd hope you would, so there's fire protection as well. It just gives you more water on the property. Every property is so different, I guess. You know, here's a classic example. Someone has a good producing spring or a well, and their response often is, I need a bigger tank. And I go, no, you need a smaller tank because it's going to recover faster. A classic example would be Emmendale out in Hearst. I mean, their water storage tank is, you know, it's just a few hundred gallons because it's a 30-gallon-a-minute spring coming into it. It recharges. Same with a well. So, but if your water resources have diminished or always have been, you need to augment the storage. If you can't store it in the ground, you got to store it on the surface, and there's no other way. Pond waters are fine, but they tend to get more contaminated. Evaporation, of course, is happening. So for drinkability, that's, you can mitigate it, but it's more difficult.
The fire departments being stuck in the past of always doing tax-based stuff. Time to start thinking outside the shoe. Need a water tender? Put up a crowdsourcing thing and get people to put towards that and buy one. I think this community would come forth for something like that. But a tax? I don't know about that. I'm certainly never in favor of taxes, because taxes are, stolen money. You don't have a choice. But hey, support your fire department. That's worth doing. So think about that. It's also important to think bigger picture and realize what we do as the larger community can actually affect how much rainfall we get. Surest way to cut down on your rainfall is cut down forests. There's certainly been no shortage of that over the past 100 years. So we may be seeing the ultimate result of that. And then just the whole general concept that we don't have enough water. Personally, I don't agree. I think we have lots and lots of water. I think we've made some extremely poor choices on how we use it. Our standard mode is to, use it and flush it, It's like, pollute it and send it away rather than put it into a closed loop. Nature has no waste. Think biomimicry.
Nobody likes taxes. I don't like taxes. I agree 100%. And I can speak for our case. We've sought out grants through the federal government, through FEMA, FireSafe. We've received over $500,000 in fuels modification grants and using the CAL FIRE crews up to work in the green belt areas of brook trails and around homes. They're limited to where they can work. They can only work on the SRA land. They can't work on private property. So we have sought grants for a lot of that. One of the first out fire engine that we have is about $300,000, $350,000 truck, and we received that under a grant that I wrote through FEMA for the Assistance to Firefighters grant. So we pursue every possible thing that we can. It finally gets down to, everybody says, well, can't you think of another way? And, hey, if you got an idea, roll a $400,000 water tender into my parking lot, I would be very grateful, but I don't really know, other than I know that I've pursued grants for this water tender for the last 7 years through FEMA and the Assistance to Firefighters grant program, and I've been turned down. Keep in mind that there's $480 million available in that grant process. There's 22,000 applications, and there were $2.4 billion in request. So it's a very competitive process, along with the natural disasters that occur, in the last grant cycle, the hurricanes back east and the floods, and now that money starts getting redirected to those deservedly so areas. So we do seek grants. We do as much as we possibly can to try to keep that expense as low as we can for the taxpayer.
This is a really quick question. I was alarmed to read in the Willits Weekly last week that something, I think the header was groundwater galore, that there was a discovery of all this groundwater. I tried to read it and understand what was implied there, like suddenly we have this water we didn't know about. Can any of you speak to this?
I'll fix it. No, what is interesting in that article and others I've read, it wasn't a recent discovery. There were some findings, in the 80s. It was a geological survey, the Water Resource Control Board, one or the other. They had basically they map out an aquifer area like the Willits Valley and anticipate by how many acre feet you have. But how many acre feet were they claiming? One report something like 50,000, and another one was 90,000 in the same year by the same department, and that caused alarm for me. I go, so what's the number? Assuming the smaller number, it's not a recent finding. No, it's been mapped out. They actually studied this aquifer pretty well at one time. That was a funny word. The choice of words was unique, I thought. It's not a word I would use.
Yeah, I hate to see articles like that. Like, don't worry, we've got all that we need. Take, use. Don't bother conserving. Don't think about the results of expanding and what all that means. And if everybody is flushing suddenly 30,000 acre feet of water, where's the sewer plant that's going to take care of it? I mean, I still make the plea for backing up and starting to ask. Look at that article and some of the information that in that article with a sense of wonder and amazement, and start asking questions about why is that? Where is it? What is it like? What is it doing? What depends on it? So I also it's hard to get away from that attitude of there's more for me, there's more for us.
I think that a question that I have is, well, what should we be doing? I mean, I'm taking quick showers and saving my water and not flushing and all that. What other things should we be doing? And I'm not just talking about right now, I'm talking about in the long range for better water security so that we protect our waters in a better way and we learn how to use it in a better way. What are some of those ways that we could be using our water for the future in a better way?
My experience is that although you can try to tell people that they should use water more judiciously, the one thing that I know works is if it's more expensive. And I realize that's not a great thing to do or say, because I mean there's a lot of people that have a hard time paying their monthly bills. So you say, well, gee, the solution to this is to triple your water bill to make sure you conserve your water. And I don't know if that's doesn't seem fair, and I'm not sure that gets the job done. But I don't know how to create the ethic that we need to all use water like it's a valuable resource without it being valuable.
There are a few things that we can do. I think it's always harder to do it by yourself than it is to do, oddly, as a community. I think it's easier to make these changes as a society, as a community, than it is alone. But a couple of things, I mean, I agree with Chris. If you value something, its true value, and this is something people in the environmental community have been saying forever, if you put the true environmental cost or the true cost on something that includes all the downstream consequences, then people are going to make different kinds of choices based on their pocketbook. But a couple of things that we could do as a county, and I guess it's sort of beginning. We could say that there shall be no new structure built without a gray water system, and probably some rooftop collection systems if there is going to be that kind of need for rainwater. And the rooftop collection systems are great because there's no detriment to the environment. It's taking it from a hard surface, it's not absorbing it all, and making it available to put back into the ground where it is absorbed. So I think many times how foolish we were when we built our house that we didn't make a gray water system. I mean, we would be saving, in the summer, probably hundreds of gallons a day just on landscaping, not even talking about vegetables. So those are two things. And so if it can be done, but you alone can't make that kind of an ordinance, but we as a community can decide at the county level that that's the plan now. When you go down for for a building permit. These are elements that you have to have in your construction.
I also remember one of our meetings before, and I worked with children in the educational system for many years. I think educating our children at an early age, I'm embarrassed to admit it, but when this drought hit and we started water conservation in our house, I realized that I turned the tap on when I got the toothpaste on the toothbrush. And I went, oh, oh. So something just as simple as that, and talking about water coming from overseas. I mean, our kids, if they start learning in kindergarten, imagine how much that could save in years to come.
One issue the city's having too, and they're working with this, but as they any conservation and people are using less water, it also reduces some funding for the city to operate their already existing water treatment plant. So it's not just our individuals, it's all of us collectively as a community. How do we operate a safe system for the public at reduced cost? Well, and we need more infrastructure built on top of it. I mean, we're in a collision course here, so it's really looking at this whole water issue. But what's really exciting to me is because of this drought, all sorts of new ways of dealing with water are right on the surface again. So as far as new ideas and thoughts, processes, that's coming to bear. So that's fantastic.
The groundwater issue, and it isn't just one, big bowl underneath us. It's all these little pockets. So there's a lot of that. Whether we have groundwater galore may depend on where you try to put your well and what the quality of that water is. And it really also depends on what the recharge rates are. And at this point in our human evolution, everything might be changing to the point where what we think is normal isn't going to ever be normal again. We have to look towards rainfall might not be ever what it used to be, averages. A much more useful concept would be what is the recharge rate, but then factor in that it may never be the same as it used. The PACE program, which is property assisted clean energy, it also is water. Water and energy conservation projects are all eligible for that particular kind of funding. Well, Willits Economic Localization is going to have a forum specifically on how to qualify for the PACE funding, the whole details of the program with Keith Rutledge, and that's going to be on Sunday, April 29th, and that'll be over at the Grange, 4 o'clock on April 29th. Several groups, which includes Willits News, the Chamber of Commerce, and the AAUW and WELL are also all co-sponsoring a candidates forum for the 3rd District Supervisor race, which looks to be a very interesting race. We have 4 candidates running, and that candidates forum will be on Wednesday, May 7th at 7 o'clock at the Grange.
The next town hall meeting is May 18th, and its title is Your Choices Make a Difference. So it's a nice little segue from this to Your Choices Make a Difference. What are the rights of a community? How do we turn our voices into action?
Well, just following on from that last announcement, yesterday I launched an online survey. It's extremely simple to use. It takes about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And it's called Willits Water Use Survey. And the question we're asking is, in a drought, in a long-term drought, what should be our priorities for using water in our community? And the purpose of this is to start a conversation, to get a significant number of people to weigh in and fill out the survey. We put out about something like about 1,200 lots of emails, and we're after more than that, I think. Anyway, it's to start a conversation amongst the community about our priorities. So I just want to make one point, if I may. I believe we can only really make substantive decisions together once we know what our priorities are. In other words, rather than make a decision based on our prejudice or bias, we've got to make it on facts, and we've got to make it on a collective survey of what we all feel is important. That's what a priority is. And it's just like in a household budget, basically. You know, how do I spend my money?
Yeah, this is real quick. There's a new wellness program that's in our community. It's called Avenues to Wellness. I'm among the people on the committee, and there's all kinds of wellness activities. It's called Avenues to Wellness. You'll see posters all over town, so come be well, come join us.
I would be remiss not to mention the bypass. But every Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock, the Save Our Little Lake Valley group meets, and it's pertinent to this topic because we are working very hard to reduce some of the wetland impacts at the northern interchange area that is not a fait accompli yet. And so we're working very hard at every political level and with Caltrans to reduce the wetland impacts there and come up with a more reasonable intersection that actually would be a heck of a lot more user-friendly for us folks. So anyone that would like to participate in that effort, come to the... Oh yeah, there's the water connection, yeah. It would not only impact fewer wetlands, but it also use thousands of gallons less water. And so 5 o'clock at the Grange is when and where we meet.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all your comments, questions. And you can be rewarded with some Girl Scout cookies, I understand, out there.